SJW channels fail, a lot of the big
SJWs can't even talk. The SJWs just literally go like they're in a body snatcher movie.
No, I mean, that is part of it, Alex. They're lazy, they're untalented. They don't spend 10 hours sat in front of the computer editing a YouTube video. They can just put out a tweet and virtue signal, and it's easier for them.
All right. Hello and welcome to the Entry Level Left. Tonight we are discussing social justice warriors, political correctness, identity politics, and call-out culture. I'm Jared.
I'm Matt.
I'm Nathan.
And tonight we have what I believe to be a very interesting episode.
For sure.
So let's get started with all this. I'm kind of giving the lead in here. What is a social justice warrior?
So I'm sure most people listening to the show are at least vaguely familiar with the term social justice warrior. If I recall correctly, the first time I heard it was like on Facebook back in the old days when I still had a bunch of like people from high school and reactionaries and different people of differing views on my Facebook. But it's definitely like this term that has become negative. I know in the past, like if you look at the history of the usage of the term, it used to be considered sort of a positive term. But basically, for people that may not be informed, social justice warrior is sort of a negative or a pejorative term for an individual who promotes quote unquote socially progressive views, including things like feminism, civil rights, even multiculturalism. So identity politics are involved in that as well. We'll get into that later in the show because that's a very big topic on the left. But basically the accusation that somebody is an SJW or a social justice warrior, it carries this implication that they're pursuing, sometimes personal validation rather than any, real deep-seated conviction. And when you see this happening, it's typically considered like the term virtue signaling, like when someone is pretending to have virtue for some type of social clout or social capital. But I think nowadays, definitely social justice warrior has become, maybe unfairly in some sense, a negative term. But when was the first time that you guys heard that term and what did you think about it?
So first time I heard it was actually like, if I remember, or when I saw it come up regularly, it was like back in the Tumblr days, probably around like 2013 or 2014. I just remember that's more when I started getting a little bit more like left on social media and whatnot. And I would just see like screen grabs of like some reactionary person like calling someone an SJW, and then there would be like a thread in response to that. And I mean, I guess like, and I should preface, I mean, there could be people who are listening to this who are like, I consider myself to be like,
I definitely consider myself to be a social
anybody who
justice
does
warrior.
Activism is kind of technically
right.
like a social justice warrior.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's like the first way you kind of, see it is in this negative sense. I mean, with that said, I do have my left critiques of what I would consider a social justice warrior. But going to the question, what is a social justice warrior? I would consider it typically someone who overall, yes, is concerned with progressive social values, but maybe their overall outlook on society and the world as it stands and is organized currently is more of a liberal one.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
This could be someone who's like, well, I'm passionate about civil rights. I'm passionate about healthcare. I'm passionate about, ending racism in America or Black Lives Matter. But
all good things.
And calling out people who say really dumb shit about those things. Yes, like you said, all good things. But maybe when they're pushed a little harder on like, okay, well, what is the means to fix this? They're probably going to default to like, well, we either need to maybe vote for people who are, in line with our views, or we just need to have like more diverse representation and things like TV and movies and business and whatever.
And we've talked about it so much at this point, like with the liberal, from like the second episode from like early days, like liberalism versus the left. If you want more about that, you can check out that episode too. But I mean, it's just generally this idea, when you see the term social justice warrior, it's a negative connotation nowadays because a lot of people on the right, especially that see these social justice warriors, they kind of look at them as like people that are only really in it for the social capital or the clout that comes along with it, but often like people that are like stereotypical social justice warriors are only vocal about it in the sense that it helps them socially, but they're maybe absent at a Black Lives Matter rally or they're absent in real activism.
They kind of use like these really stereotypical pictures of people. Like it'll always be like, an overweight girl wearing like almost nothing with like a pink hair,
right?
And like she doesn't shave her armpits and has thick rim glasses, and you'll see these same pictures pop up over and over again.
Patriarchy. We do not hate you, fuckface, Mr. Entitled, Mr. Ego, patriarchy, fuckface.
And they're just using these because they want, when anyone says SJW, they want that image to pop in their head, and everyone goes, "Oh my god, I know somebody that's like that. I sat next to somebody in college that's just like that," And that's exactly what they're kind of shooting to. To kind of answer your question earlier, you had said, "Where did you first see it?" And it's kind of interesting you said Tumblr because I saw it on the opposite side of the internet on 4chan, and that's. If you had asked me where it started, that's where I would say probably a lot of this kind of language started going around. That's probably why it showed up on Tumblr, because there was a lot of back and forth between those two websites, back then. And I think from 4chan, it started kind of like permeating, like things do, onto different websites like Facebook,
Reddit,
like where you saw Reddit and stuff like that. And then I think now what's kind of scary is that it has started to show up on Fox News.
Right.
Now Tucker Carlson talks about SJWs, and before O'Reilly or Hannity. Yeah. Like they all kind of make these references kind of back to this kind of SJW culture. Right. And they want you to picture the fat pink hair feminist stereotypical girl in your head. They want you to hate that.
They want you to disconnect the social progressive values from it. They want you to think of a social justice warrior as just this caricature of some type of like, person that like an average conservative or just like, a MAGA chud like wouldn't connect with. Like they would have nothing in common. They would have nothing to speak about because they want to isolate the bad things that they don't connect with them on, like socially liberal, like aesthetics or whatever the case may be. They want to alienate that from the main purpose of, the term, which is like someone that is involved and inspired by or passionate about or social justice and civil rights, feminism, whatever, could be anything. But I think, Nathan, you bring up an excellent point that I wanted to touch on, and we've talked about this before, and we've been excited to do this episode because we wanted to talk a little bit about the origin. But I mean, someone that comes to mind specifically would be like Ben Shapiro, because Ben Shapiro got a lot of his fame, like started becoming more prominent because of YouTube videos where he goes and titles it, liberal owned on campus, blah, blah, blah. But then you watch the video and it's like this 17-year-old girl with blue hair who is probably like a middle-class person coming from like a middle-class background that is like a freshman and doesn't understand like how to counter arguments or doesn't have like a large like repertoire of information to debunk what like nonsense Ben Shapiro is saying. Yeah. So he basically frames the video as if he's like owning this person in a debate where it's like it's fundamentally unequal, and it's also like on his end very gimmicky. Yeah. But I feel like people like Ben Shapiro rose to prominence over the rise of this social justice warrior
not just him.
Culture.
Steven Crowder, Milo. Milo, good. Jordan Peterson himself. That was his big break. I mean, he started to veer more towards like the intellectualism side of things.
Well, he wanted to give.
That's how he started.
He wanted to give a
more air quotes around intellectualism.
Yeah, but
he wanted does like the one-on-one debates.
Yeah, no, he wanted to give more what appeared to be more intellectual and rational legitimacy to the shit that like because Steven Crowder, Milo, Ben Shapiro, their whole goal from the beginning was to be like, stupid SJW, whatever.
Yeah, it's completely owning.
Right, versus like what Peterson wanted to do is to give it more of like that kind of academic legitimacy.
Yeah. Our research did indicate, it's tentative research so far, that the SJW sort of equality above all else philosophy is more prevalent among women. It's predicted by the personality factors that are more common among women. So agreeableness and high negative emotion, primarily agreeableness. But in addition, it's also predicted by being female.
So it gave like a a more legitimate argument to the alt-right, because at the end of the day, like, going to where did this terminology first appear, regardless of how we saw it first appear in our lives, it is largely an alt-right terminology. I mean, it came from the alt-right, and so now that the alt-right has been legitimized, we see it in their major platforms.
Yeah, right. And it plays in other narratives too, like the whole like cultural Marxism narratives and things like that as well. So there is like larger conspiracies behind it too.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, with all of that said, I would say that I do, while like progressive social values are like obviously a good objective to have, I myself, considering myself on the left, do have my criticisms of what I perceive to be a social justice warrior.
Same. And mine mostly revolve around, like just clout, like people, virtue signaling,
right?
Essentially, pretending to be, this great activist, but really all you're doing is sharing memes,
right?
Essentially, like you're not showing up at rallies, you're not organizing people,
or like literally going out of your way to like dig up information on someone you consider a friend from some stupid shit they said like 10 years ago, and then trying to completely like ruin their lives over.
Oh, I mean, a lot of it is in who you're targeting. Like, if you're going on a more neutral space, like a comment section on a newspaper, and you're saying, hey, this is a little bit problematic, you shouldn't be speaking like this, that's something. But if you're tracking down like another friend who's almost just as left as you, and is genuinely trying to do the right thing, and you're going to police them on like very small things instead of being constructive, like you're kind of working against like the larger picture, the larger movement.
Well, I think so. I mean, I think that transitions kind of into like the next point, which is one thing that's often associated with, such social justice warriors or social justice warrior culture, and what's particularly called out by the right, or at least is dominantly called out by the right, is this idea of political correctness. Right. So I guess my question in the group would be, what is political correctness? What do we mean by political correctness? And probably also, how has the right sort of invoked this terminology?
It's a complicated discussion to have, because I think the right has co-opted the phrase in some sense. Like, they've definitely turned it into something that it isn't necessarily. But to me, like, political correctness is just like, knowing when not to say something, knowing to be sort of diplomatic in the words that you use and the way that you approach situations. But more than that, I think, like, to just condense it or crystallize it, it's just like, I've always thought of political correctness as just being compassionate, like, just be kind, like, don't, use like an R slur to talk about handicapped people or people with disabilities, like, just like understanding that, your words have power, like understanding that while something may be like not charged to you, someone else may have an experience or something, about their identity that word or that phrase or the way that you approach a situation can be charged in a different way because of their experiences. And I think political correctness, just to be frank about it, is just like this culture of, just be compassionate, be empathetic, understand where you fit in, like where your privileges lie, where your identity lies, and understand that other people don't share that same experience. You don't need to be like, I guess, condescending about it, but just like understand that those people experience things differently from you and be accepting and open and kind about it.
So political correctness, I mean, obviously it's used on the right for them. Like when you say like, something is clearly abhorrent, you know what I mean? Like what you just said is clearly like fucking horrendous, like a lot of the shit Milo used to say. They'd be like, oh, free speech, you're just a like whiny, politically correct SJW or whatever.
The larger battle here, the thing that I fight for on American college campuses, is the right to be, do, and say whatever you want. It's about freedom of expression, the First Amendment, which is something that's under threat in this country like perhaps never before.
But like me being someone on the left, like I do have some beefs with political correctness. Like I don't think all the time that political correctness is necessarily like being used to invoke compassion. For instance, like me not calling someone with a disability the R word, or me not calling someone a racial slur, isn't me being politically correct. That's me not being a fucking giant piece of shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I inherently know not to do that.
Exactly.
If you don't inherently know not to do that, or you feel an urge or compelled to do that, then you're probably a reactionary piece
Yeah,
of
I mean,
shit.
I get what you're saying. You're not being politically correct. You're just like not being a complete
to
piece
me,
of shit.
and I guess my like where I even have gray area with this political correctness is the idea that it's like if you don't really heavily police like everything you say as constantly and as frequently as it's changing. I'm not saying that it's not changing with the best intentions, but like as soon as it's not, your language hasn't adapted immediately. And, you know, you got screenshots of you like saying something that someone else wants to make a big deal or say is inappropriate or whatever. Then all of a sudden now it's like, you know, you're problematic and, you know, this, that, and the other. And so to me, political correctness is kind of, it really waves this fine line because I think there's a variance between the ways in which political correctness is adopted by or used by the left versus the way political correctness is used by more of what I would consider kind of the social justice, like liberal types. Because I do feel like political correctness can oftentimes be weaponized, even against people who are on further to the left.
Yeah. And there's ways for the left and people who are acting completely in the left's interest to be labeled politically incorrect as well.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like all the talks about, like, I know it's kind of stupid and memey at this point, but, you know, people talking about gulags or people talking about giving people the wall and, you know, like revolution jokes and things like that. They're not politically correct. You know what I mean? And that's a completely a leftist type of humor. So it's like, it's almost kind of like, it's not necessarily an inherently like right-wing type of accusation.
Yeah, like political incorrectness isn't inherently reactionary.
It's kind of like a mainstream kind of bias, you know what I mean? Like an establishment bias more than just like a right-wing bias.
But like I have, like for instance, you know, someone saying, oh, you know, American Indian culture, you know, says or believes this, that, or the other.
Did you just
say someone,
Indian?
And then someone getting on there and being like, I can't believe you would say that. It's actually, and I'm like, first of all, you're a white person. Why are you talking to me about this? You know what I mean? Like, also, there's a far better way to go about having that discussion. If you are truly concerned with the person learning and not using that terminology, then this immediate inversion to call out, like out of using more politically correct language, my main issue with it and the way I've seen it employed by, I think, a lot more of the social justice liberal types towards people on the left is in a way that's almost opportunistic. Like you were talking about earlier, like the kind of like clout upping, you know, and
clout game.
Yeah, clout game and doing, you know, like, hey, look at me, I'm calling out this person on this incorrect language that they use. And it's like, first of all, a lot of times the people who are doing this have no place to really be splitting hairs over this shit. And two, even if they do, the manner in which they go about it, I just think is fundamentally incorrect.
No, I agree. But to give the listener like a concrete definition of political correctness, most people would consider it the avoidance, often considered as taken to extremes, of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against. So in my opinion, even the way that it's defined colloquially or in the mainstream kind of indicates that it's already been co-opted by the right wing.
Right.
Like it already indicates some type of like othering for extremism, for just being concerned about civil rights or social progressive values. Like to me, I think it's a masterful tactic by the right to undermine these things that are otherwise really objectively positive in society and to put them in a negative light as if they're something that is unachievable or something that is even undesirable. And that I think is the biggest takeaway for me that makes me upset about it.
Well, yeah, and I think that's, you know, what you were saying about the right is in sort of the way that they use political correctness is it's always someone who, you know, they say an extremely inflammatory argument. They make jokes about like killing immigrants at the border, you know, this, that, and the other. And then you call them out on it and you're like, oh, well, you're just upset because you're politically correct or you're one of those SJWs or something like that. When in reality, like you're calling out something that has like the ability to enact real material violence like on someone. Like it's really happening, you know? And I think that the issue here specifically with like the right, though, is we already know that these arguments that they make in regards to political correctness are a sham to begin with. I mean, Fox News, who is really the like one of the major vocal points for the alt-right and like the alt-right bastions that exist within the United States, certainly now with like the Tucker Carlson types, Sean Hannity, like you listed earlier. I mean, they've dedicated episodes of their shows on primetime hours to this notion of like the war on Christmas.
You know what's coming, not just cold weather and shopping and caroling, but also new progressive attacks on Christmas.
I know that that's so drug out by even like liberal MSNBC types, but like why that's so important to me in regards to this political correctness debate is because they find it funny that you're offended. You can't take a joke when they say something horrendous
about a minority
that is actually happening. But because a Starbucks employee says Happy Holidays as opposed to Merry Christmas, they are running primetime television hours about this notions of like cultural Marxism. And
they're trying to disrupt and destroy traditions and replace them with their own version of some transitory nonsense.
And it's not like they stop with one thing, right? They find something, they kind of destroy that, and they'll move on to everything else that we love.
Oh yeah, the world's falling apart.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Why though? Why? It's very important why. They don't actually give a shit about the whole Happy Holidays versus Christmas thing. What they give a shit about is that it's an affront to historically traditional white Christian values and cultural dominance within society.
Which is funny because in a way, it's like they're using that definition that Matt said earlier of political correctness, and they're using the kind of fuzzy parts where they're saying like marginalized groups, and they're saying, well, what's a marginalized group? And so this whole game of identity politics kind of enters. And that's where they've said, oh, not only are black people oppressed and not only are Muslims oppressed, but so are Christians. We're all oppressed. And so they use that kind of fuzziness of what political correctness actually is to kind of make their own point.
I think the average like right-wing person or the average conservative doesn't honestly believe that oppression or marginalization exists in society. I really feel like they think like since the civil rights movement happened and everyone is technically equal under the eyes of the law, even though they're, you know, big air quotes around that.
Right.
But I think that they really believe that social justice warriors and people that are politically correct are doing it like in vain for their own like selfish clout reasons.
Of course.
Because the right wingers don't actually believe in any like long-standing or systemic, you know, oppression or marginalization in society, because think of their media. Like nothing in their media in Fox News tells them to view things in a structural way. It's never about solving the root of the problem. It's always about deflecting it and scapegoating some other group that has, you know, some type of like cultural stake in the problem, but it's not really structurally their fault. But it's like it's easy for right-wing pundits to say, okay, well, it's just all these like rapists and these people, these cartel members coming in from Mexico that we're trying to keep out.
Right. And honestly, that's a great point that you just brought up, because what it goes back to is all the way back to our episode 3 on neoliberalism, because at the end of the day, like what is their mantra? Like what is the sort of end all be all for the modern American right wing and even the modern American like liberal class is this idea of extreme individuality, right?
The proper way to fix the world isn't to fix the world. There's no reason to assume that you're even up to such a task, but you can fix yourself. You'll do no one any harm by doing so. And in that manner, at least, you will make the world a better place. I'm Jordan Peterson.
For Prager University.
As soon as the civil rights movement happens, all things are appeased. Now it's on you, the individual. If you can't make it happen, if you can't pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get you out of this situation that the United States government has spent the past 200 years enforcing upon you.
Yeah.
The black card will still confer upon you an entire history of oppression, even if you've never been oppressed.
It's because you're lazy, you're a failure, you can't do this, and you know anyone who can has a more superior work ethic. When in reality, we know that not to be the case, but that is a much easier, much more prevailing, and much more useful narrative to keep these sorts of dialogues and class interests sort of in power in the way that they are in society.
Yeah, it's very useful to the ruling class for people to look at problems in an individualized, atomized sense, because what that allows people to think in society is that, you know, they don't have power.
Right.
Like they don't have group power or any type of like means to accrue power through whether it's collective bargaining, whether it's organization, politically, anything like that. They don't want us to believe that we have power. And even going back to like a previous episode we have on private prisons where we talked about, I think it was like the CEO of maybe Wayfair or one of these companies that was distributing home goods and bedding to migrant detention centers or concentration camps. Like, I'm just going to say it. It's a concentration camp. Anyway, if you don't agree, fuck you. So, but what I mean is like, this guy basically said like, don't use your work time to be political. As a company, we're not political. We're just selling to concentration camps. So, that's not political at all in any way. I'm being sarcastic, but I'm just saying, this is the type of ideology that gets passed down from the ruling class into the managerial class and the keepers of capitalism and these ideologues that reinforce it in the working class. But this is what it becomes, like atomized, individualized approaches to solving structural societal problems that, unless we band together and have like a unified front on, we'll never dent them.
But kind of bringing it back to like the episode like topic here, I think one reason why that this sort of hyper individualized neoliberalist like mantra is so relevant to a lot of what we're talking about in this episode now, and how it's easy for the right to sort of, or especially the ruling class, but also the right wing like pundits and stuff, to sort of like fish up and use like SJWs and political correctness and all this as a means to like, invigorate this like mass like right wing movement, is because of the long standing individualist sort of neoliberal like mantra that's been imposed on our society at large, and this sort of idea that if you don't make it, it's on your own work ethic and it has nothing structurally to do with anything else. There obviously are a lot of like disenfranchised working class, like white people, for instance, in the United States, right? And having grown up in this society and not being, completely aware of, let's say, like Marxist analysis of the economy, all they see is them busting their ass and not making enough money. And they have these outlets telling them that the reason that they're not making as much is because these immigrants are taking their jobs and all that stuff. And they can't say anything about it. We can't really say this. We can't speak truth because everyone's so politically correct now, or all these SJWs are defending these.
I mean, it's clear that the right doesn't have like a full and thorough understanding of what they're even like lobbying against or fighting against.
Well, I think the unified like intelligentsia of the right knows exactly what they're doing.
They know what they're trying to engineer socially and culturally, but I'm saying the average right-winger or working-class right-winger doesn't understand that it's, it's not the immigrant that's taking a job. It's your boss just won't pay you more. Like your boss would gladly hire an illegal immigrant to do the same job that you do for way less money if they can get away with it. But
that's
also,
not the immigrant's fault.
Yeah, it's like another thing I wanted to bring up with this bootstrap ideology and this neoliberal, ideology where, everything is so individualized. I would say look at it from like the capitalist mode of production sense. Like, even if you think that like everything is the individual's responsibility, like if you look at the way capitalism works, like no capitalist is getting rich off like their individual work and individual ingenuity.
Right.
Like it's always them getting rich off of exploiting the working class and extracting the surplus value from their labor. And I'll give you an example. Like, say, you work a job and you work in sort of like a professional white collar job, and your boss charges the customer maybe $120 per hour of your time, and you're making like $20 or $30 of that, cost that is the customer is seeing. And there's literally no overhead cost for your boss. Like he's literally just making $100 off of, or $90 off of every hour that you spend working and billing to the customer. So in that scenario, like the only reason that you are not making $120 per hour is because you don't have the means of production. You don't own private property. You don't drive to your own office. You work for somebody else. So even if we take and follow, this neoliberal ideology to its conclusion and we look at the way capitalism functions, it still is incoherent. Like, it makes no sense to say that everybody just needs to pull themselves up by their bootstrap and that everybody that is an individual got there because of their own individual ingenuity. That's just bullshit. Like, no one gets to be a billionaire, a millionaire completely on their own. Like, there's no way.
Right.
Like, it just doesn't happen. That's just not the way the economy works. It's not the way that capitalism works.
And like full circle irony is that the term bootstrap and even the term meritocracy, or pulling yourself up by your bootstrap, and meritocracy were both written as satire,
right,
about what we're talking about.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think though, like, I mean, with all that said, like what you were just saying, Matt, like, and kind of going back to previous points that were made, I mean, like the right has organized this very, very efficient narrative about what is happening in our society, you know, being invaded by, you know, rapists and drug dealers and all that stuff. And you're working just as hard, you working class American man, aka white man, and you know, you should be entitled to reap those benefits, but you're not because of immigrants, and we can't kick the immigrants out because, you know, we can't do any of this stuff because people are too politically correct, or, you know, they're social justice warriors or whatever. But then with all of that said, the only sort of alternative to this narrative in our society comes from the more liberal elite, whose entire political structure is focused strictly on identity politics because of the fact that they cannot in any way come up with, you know, some sort of class analysis as to what's going on and educate, you know, let's say the Democratic base on this matter, because they have a vested class interest in keeping everything exactly the same. The only difference being them advocating, well, you know, if we had more diverse cartoon characters, or, you know, if Jeff Bezos was, you know, I don't know, like we've said in previous episodes, like a woman of color, like.
Hot topic alert. How do we get more women into board positions? Is this a trend that is here to stay, or can you sit this one out? I am Beate Gillette, the founder of the Women's Code, also known as the Growth Architect. I'm in service of gender equality.
You know, they want more inclusion and diversity in the political sphere, in everything from advertisements to business owners to you name it. But all of those things do not change the fundamental system and structure of capitalism as a whole.
Right.
It just paints it a new shade of fucking green, you know, and tries to make it appear that it's something different, when in reality it's very much the same thing. It's just not quite as harsh.
I don't know if you remember, Jared, but when we were at like this like political organization meeting, we were talking to someone and we both kind of said to this person at the same time, representation doesn't equal justice. You know what I mean?
Or representation is not a political platform.
Yeah, and
like,
it's not justice in and of itself to just have more representation if it's not coming with an economic change.
And I think that who put it the best, honestly, was Sam in our last episode, because on the episode on feminism, she said specifically how, you know, like Marx, for instance, was extremely effective in the 1800s at organizing predominantly the white working class, you know, globally, because that's who it was directed at. And this sort of appeals to white working class workers, and how the insertion of a more like, you know, inclusive, yes, identity-based type of analysis or program, which she called, you know, like black feminism, for instance, that being incorporated into those ideals kind of marries the two, where you have, yes, inclusion and representation, but with the overlying or sort of bedrock of structural analysis, Marxist analysis, class analysis, because you can't really have one without the other.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, race and identity are important things. And, you know, we're definitely not going to downplay that, because the way that race is socially constructed and the way that class has formatted our society, I mean, they're inextricably tied together. They're inseparable concepts.
Especially in the U.S.
But just to give like a concrete definition to our listeners who may not be aware of the context of the argument and the term identity politics. Identity politics is sort of this tendency for people of a particular religion, race, social background, etc., to form exclusive political alliances and also their tendency to move away from traditional broad-based party politics, like, class-based politics, like if you're a Marxist or a socialist or a communist, or any other type of like broad-based party politics. Like, so identity politics is not always like a negative connotation, but it should be coming second in terms of an analysis to like a materialist analysis of society and how society has become fundamentally unequal in an economic sense. Because all of these social constructs like race and gender and things like that, they matter less. I mean, they're still important, but they matter less than the overarching way that we had this society formatted as a patriarchal, like white dominated society, white supremacist society. I mean, these things were formatted by capital and early forms of accumulation. So the identity politics, while important in understanding the intersections of how marginalized groups have formed in the modern day, it's also important to understand the underlying class structure as to why these things happen in the first place and in whose interest they are formatted and constructed.
Not that I necessarily disagree, but I think that it's kind of what you're saying, like class and how we understand society organized around capital accumulation, and how class inherently develops in that society is obviously extremely crucial. I think the importance of where identity intersects with that is specifically how identity is used to divide the classes specifically.
Yeah,
like, it's much easier to discipline your workforce if they're convinced that the other half of the same exact pool of workers that just look differently than them are less than them, or, out to get them, or whatever the case may be. And I think that's really where the intersection of identity, class, and, class analysis ought to be at. And merging the two. Not that one necessarily takes supremacy over the other, but that you can't really understand one without the other, especially in the United States and how we've developed up until this point in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think
dialectical relationship.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's like, like what Mao wrote about.
But I think that overall, because we're kind of on this point about political correctness and identity politics and how the two are sort of related to the modern like capitalist organization within society and that sort of thing. The right has used these elements, though, to delegitimize a lot of what I think the left is trying to achieve by sort of saying like, oh, well, we can't even have any view on this whatsoever because we're white. You know what I mean? Like, identity politics has made it so that only these people can speak on these issues, and that's not the case at all. The problem is a lot of times the right just wants to say, again, incredibly like abhorrent and racist things without any consequences or any sort of anything happening to them in regards to their statements or their views politically, or how society ought to be organized. And anytime there's any pushback whatsoever, it's considered to be too politically correct or too rooted in identity politics. And again, goes back to this like giant conspiracy of cultural Marxism.
So when we look back over the history of political correctness, we can see that it's deeply entrenched in the ideology of cultural Marxism.
Yeah, I think it's bullshit, but let's just be clear, like identity, class are important indicators for, studying sociological phenomena. Like,
right.
I mean, there's no end ifs or buts about it. Like, the right can be as, condescending and arrogant as they want, like, all day long. But when it comes right fucking down to it, like, if you want to have an intelligent, educated discussion, like, no, like, person of any type of intelligence is going to look you in the eye and say, yeah, like, marginalized communities and racism and discrimination, yeah, it doesn't exist. Like,
right.
No one is going to tell you that. So, I mean, I think the left should just be, unapologetic about it. Like, we shouldn't need to explain at this point that marginalization, racism, and discrimination are real things.
Right.
And we shouldn't further have to explain, like, why you should be concerned about social progressive values or civil rights. Like,
right.
It's like a non-issue at this point. I feel like it's so ridiculous to have to explain why you care about the world being a better place and everybody being in unity. Like, I don't understand what the big deal is.
Well, I don't think any of those arguments that they have are good faith whatsoever.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, there's really just no point in engaging in. So with all of that said, another thing that I think the right and left both kind of have, again, their critiques, or maybe the right has like tropes about and whatnot, but specifically this idea of like call out culture.
Yep.
And so I guess before we really get into it, what is call out culture?
Call out culture, like, to give an example, is just like when something someone does is deemed socially unacceptable, abusive, toxic, whatever, and they are called out on social media or otherwise to alert other people in that social group that this person that perpetrated these actions is either dangerous, not to be trusted, an abuser, toxic, or just some negative personality trait that they've exemplified, whether it's something very serious like sexual assault,
right,
or if it's something minor like, they just said a word that the other person didn't like,
right.
You know what I mean? So it could range from something very kind of minor to something very serious. But I mean, we probably all, like, and many listeners have experiences with this. But one example would be, I'll just make one up. Like, this isn't like a specific example, but say like there's a couple in the social group that you hang around. Like, they have a consensual relationship. One of them breaks it off and the other person is jealous and makes up some type of a story about what happened. And then they broadcast it all over social media and call this other person like a piece of garbage and blah, blah, blah. And then they have all their friends jump in and like validate and corroborate the story. Whether it's true or not doesn't really matter in this particular instance, but that's just an example of like what a call out would be. And it's usually carried out online on social media.
And I mean, you said earlier, it's like, it's clout chasing. When you're hearing someone use it as like call out culture, they're usually talking about the aspect of this person doing the call out is trying to one up this other person. And that's why I had said it earlier, and you'll hear this meme all the time about the left eats itself.
Right.
You know, it comes from this, is the idea that you're not left enough. Like someone like Contrapoints, who is like foundational for LeftTube, like a very center of like leftist politics online, just deleted her Twitter because she got called out super duper hard for, of all things, saying that non-binary people and trans people have slightly different agendas, that maybe they could have slightly conflicting agendas.
Right.
And it's like, if you want to look into that, do that. I'm not going to explain the whole situation, but what she said was part of a larger nuanced take that she's talked about before.
Right.
And she doesn't come from obviously Contrapoints, who is a trans woman, doesn't come from a place of malice for non-binary people, but she was driven to delete her Twitter because
of all the hate,
are trying to call her out, message her about this, like, really brief and I mean, and somewhat shitty, tweet
it was
that she
shitty,
put out,
but like, does that really overshadow all the good work that they've done?
No,
absolutely not. And when there's an explanation so readily available, it seems like it's almost not their fault,
No, and I mean, I'm sorry, like, like, people can feel the way they need to about it. Like, they can, say maybe that she needs to think about that harder. I really don't think that anyone giving the like nuance provided and all that she has done for the left and whatnot, I really don't fucking care. Like, honestly, like, with all that nuance provided, who it is who said it, anyone who is trying to call out another person, and that it's in bad faith. It is in bad faith. And I think that trying to delegitimize people who have done great work over minor, mistakes or wrong takes and shit like that. One, it only fucking exists in the internet. It's heavily online.
You would never do that to a person in real life.
It's
like,
heavily online. It's heavily online. It's people trying to, on the left, a lot of times trying to out left or out woke each other.
Yeah.
And it's extremely, and the reason why we brought this up and why it's tied into this episode is it's extremely common in a lot of like fringe left groups. I mean, I've at least done political organizing where either someone I know, or maybe if it was even me or what have you, was called out for something that was just completely fucking baseless because of a political take. You know what I mean? Like, you had the wrong take because you were uneducated about this. And instead of that person coming up to you and saying, hey, this made me feel uncomfortable and let's have a conversation about it and let's discuss it and help you actually grow from it. Fuck that. I'm going to delete you on social media. I'm going to tag you in a blast fucking Facebook post and tell every single fucking person how much of a piece of shit you are. Like that right there has no benefit at all to building the left. And quite honestly, I don't really think that many of these people are actually truly on the left. I think a lot of the call out culture stems quite honestly from upper class
liberals,
white liberals who got radicalized in college, and as soon as they graduate are no longer going to be fucking radicals anymore.
Here's the thing too, is like the problem that you have to pay attention to is just the optics that the call outs provide. Like the person who is calling out Natalie Wynn,
right,
Contrapoints, is not the same person who's calling out right-wingers or actively debating right-wingers or convincing right-wingers like Contrapoints does. So you're kind of shooting the movement and in the foot. You're shooting yourself in the foot because it's like these same people are just actively damaging the left. They're not actually going out and fighting for it.
They also don't care. What they're looking for is they want someone to take a screenshot of their tweet and share it around. And that's all they fucking care about.
They want their 30 seconds of fame.
Right. Another like slightly related example to this call out culture, and I hate you guys are going to hate it because I'm going to put the clip in right here.
If we want to defeat capitalism, we are going to need a party that will organize working people to fight for the demands that we want and to win socialism. Thank you so much.
Quick point of privilege. Quick point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Guys, first of all, James Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. I just want to say, can we please keep the chatter to a minimum? I'm one of the people who's very, very prone to sensory overload. There's a lot of whispering and chatter going on. It's making it very difficult for me to focus. Please, can we just, I know we're all fresh and ready to go, but can we please just keep the chatter to a minimum? It's affecting my ability to focus. Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, is there a speaker against name, chapter, pronouns?
Point of personal privilege.
Yes.
Please do not use gendered language to address everyone.
Okay.
All right. You know, the DSA meeting.
Right.
You know?
Oh, gosh.
And in that event, it just sets this weird tone where you've just given ammo to the right just to make fun of.
Right.
You know, and maybe those people have slightly valid points, but to do that so publicly and to just make kind of an ass of yourself, I hate to say it.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. Yeah.
In front of everybody, when we're really truly working towards something, when like the DSA is actually as shitty as they do it sometimes, really actually trying to work towards something,
right,
and we're going to interrupt it with these kind of like one-upmanship type games, you know?
And that's the thing is, I think Sam might have touched on this a bit in the last episode. It's like, as someone on the left and who has done left organizing before, like, I have no issue with progressive stack. Like, progressive stack is like a part of pretty much any general meeting,
Yeah.
But how you handle that at a conference is you need to maybe have the speakers lined up, be of a diverse crowd, have your groups do a progressive stack in their individual meetings of some kind. But this whole like point of privilege, like, completely derailing the entire like movement to pay optic service towards the fucking internet left who's not even present at any of your fucking meetings. Like, to me, it's not only making an ass of yourself. I don't believe it.
It's virtue signaling.
I don't think it's legitimate. I really don't believe that anyone in that room felt like what was going on was legitimate, but they did it anyway to appease some sort of, or I guess, virtue signal.
Yeah,
or whatever
that's what I would
may be.
consider it. I mean, but don't get me wrong. Like, there are definitely scenarios where, someone is called out for a legitimately bad thing.
Of course.
There have been abusers that have been called out, and because of them being called out, like, the community is safer. Like, it's not an inherently bad thing, call out culture. It's just when it's used in the wrong way, when it's used for social leverage and clout rather than its intended purpose of making communities safer,
right?
Then it's just kind of useless. And when you get into this, when you bring identity politics into it, or, political correctness, or, social justice warrior culture into it, you get these things like the DSA convention where it's just like everything becomes a point of privilege where you've got to sort out all of these different, like, problems, or like, who's marginalized, who's not marginalized, who is more, oppressed, and these different things. It's just like, stop for a second and just realize you're not the only person in the room.
Right.
That's
and
all I have
just
to
stop
say.
playing games, because to me it looked like one giant fucking game.
And for people who actually have concerns, like, think about whether, is this a private message thing? Is this a, maybe you should talk to your friends and then approach that party again thing and see what other people really think about it? Like, or should this be a public comment?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes public call outs like the Me Too movement are fantastic.
Right.
Because that's how we get shit done.
Right.
But other times when it's something like a DSA meeting, you're just not making any progress by doing that type of
or
stuff
just
out loud.
minor political talking
I
points.
feel like if you're at a convention like that with other socialists or other, socially progressive people, like, and you feel the need, or you feel so oppressed or marginalized in that environment, I feel like there's, maybe something wrong with the environment itself.
Right. But I mean, I think this idea of like call out culture, it transitions into this idea of like, how do we on the left like correct these sorts of, issues that we see? Do we enact a sort of more punitive measures like punishment? This person is canceled and needs to be isolated from all of their friends and whatnot because they did something that we deem, wrong. And, obviously if it's something heinous, then fine. But, if they said something really stupid or like, let's say racist or whatever, 5 fucking years ago, 10 fucking years ago, and it gets dug up on the internet, certainly like that's an incorrect view to have. But like you have to talk to them about that. I'm sure that if they were spoken to, they would then see, oh, yeah, I shouldn't have said these things and it's hurtful to people. Or, yeah, I totally see, or they might already know how stupid and ignorant it sounds. They've already moved way beyond where they were in that time frame. And it's more important to restore that person's mentality rather than completely just isolate them or look to call them out and gain some sort of internet notoriety for it.
If I could just say, a word of wisdom to like, people on the left and in situations like this, you just need to talk to the people in your life, talk to your social circle, and really have an understanding of like, what is a boundary? Like, what is something that can be forgiven? What is something that is not forgivable? What is something that is, figure out a threshold or a boundary so that you can understand, what is something that needs to be punished? Like, for example, if there's an abuser, there's a sexual abuser or someone who, has just done something, like Jared said, absolutely heinous. That is something that maybe deserves a little bit of punitive reaction or response. Whereas like someone who says a bad word or says something that's like insensitive, like say, hey, I understand like you were socialized to feel like that word is acceptable, but when you say that word, it hurts people like this, or it hurts people like me. When you say the R word, it hurts people like me that have a disability that is not necessarily visible. You know what I mean? Being like that or approaching the situation like that is going to not only educate the person that you're confronting, but it's going to let them know that you care about them enough to restore the good relationship that you have with them. And if you just kind of extrapolate that onto large groups of people on the left, especially where we don't have a lot of institutional power, it's important that we understand when to forgive and when to, be more punishing to people.
Especially too, when you're doing any kind of actual organizing work with real working class people.
Yeah. Not on left book.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Like the working class is backwards. They are backwards. You know what I mean? Like, for the most part, like they have a lot of backwards views. It's hard to grow up in this society. Or it's not hard to. It's impossible to grow up in this society and not have backwards views on things.
Baggage and all that stuff.
Whether conscious or subconscious. Like it's just a fact of growing up in American society. And we have to have these more restorative approaches to things and be willing to do this when it's in good faith. Because if we don't, then we also risk isolating people who we absolutely must have in the movement.
Yeah, and losing them to 4chan and 8chan.
Right, exactly.
And next week you see them blowing up a mosque or something. I don't know.
Right.
And like as leftists, we're supposed to be empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to understand that people are products of their environment and that they are made up completely of their material conditions.
Right.
So why is it that when someone has a slightly problematic view that just goes out the window.
Right.
You know, we can look at a criminal and say, well, they had a problem with social, you know, their socioeconomic status. There's mental health problems that were untreated, yada, yada, yada. We can make up 100 reasons as to why someone might commit a crime. But then when we say this person said something slightly problematic, we're like, nope, done.
Right.
Boom. We want to put them, we talked about in one episode, or we talked about in the private prison episodes, you know, when we put someone in prison, the goal should be, let's get them out and let's make them a better citizen so that they don't do this again.
Let's reintegrate them.
Exact same way that people with these slightly problematic views should be done. Now, I'm not saying like if someone's like, actually, black people's brains are smaller.
Right.
We're not saying like, no, forgive them and like next week we're gonna have like a sit down with them and it's all gonna be cool. But we're saying that if someone says something that's slightly off, like maybe they don't quite understand. You know, the non-binary thing,
or they don't understand
whatever.
Why the R word is offensive.
Yeah.
You know, like or whatever.
Or they let something slip out that, you know, just didn't touch you the right way. It's like you can't just decide like to cut them off completely.
Right.
You wouldn't do that to a criminal if you're a leftist.
Right.
Then why would you do it to somebody who you thought was a friend? You know.
And now, one thing I will say, perhaps on a final note on this, because liberals love to take my views on this and then sit there and be like, because I'm typically online, be like, well, if you believe in this restorative approach, then wouldn't you feel this way towards someone like a Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden who had these horrible views in the past or enacted this horrible legislation? And to that, I, of course, have to say one giant fuck no. And the reason is because these people not only have had institutional power, but continued to enact institutional power throughout their careers long after the fact that they did or said these more problematic things, say in the 90s, like the crime bill or the super predators comments and shit.
Yeah.
They continued to do this for years and years and years, all the way up until presidential elections, in which point it became inconvenient to have those views anymore.
Yeah.
Or in the instance of brain dead Biden, you just have no ability to even cognitively know where you are. Therefore, you don't even make any fucking attempt to try and, you know, recoil some stupid ass shit that you said back in the 90s. Or
at
whenever.
best, these people are just like caving their views to whatever is currently popular. It's either that or they're just willfully ignorant. You know, this information has been available to them their whole lives. They all come from a place of privilege, and they just completely ignore these narratives that have been going on for years and years. Like, well, I don't even know which is more aggravating. And I don't know which I'd prefer it to be.
And they're still ignoring them. Regardless of all the optics and theatrics, they still give absolutely no fucks about any of that shit.
But I mean, you know, at least Joe Biden is keeping us safe from corn pop. So that's
that's always good.
That's all good.
Good old corn pop. Well, anyway,
I think we should go into a very special segment of our show. We're actually doing this for the first time, but it's something we thought would be really fun. So we actually took
our clothes off.
That too. So we're also fully naked right now. We're gonna take some
like every podcast
listener questions.
Okay, so our first question comes from Anthony, and he asks, did you have an event or a thing that radicalized you or something that galvanized you as an ardent anti-capitalist? If so, what was it? Or was it a slow burn over time, just building of contradictions in capitalism that had you seeking more?
I think for me particularly, it was sort of like a slow burn over time. Although I just recently saw, you know, on Facebook when you have those posts that like are like posts from the past that come back and, you know, you can post them again.
Memories.
Yeah, memories. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I'm illiterate. But yeah, so like a memory came up a few days ago of me posting something 7 years ago that was very clearly indicating that there was some type of a class undertone to politics. And I feel like if you go to most people, most like liberal leaning people nowadays, you can get them to agree that there's something corrupt in politics. Like money in politics is corrupt. Like there's something wrong with the campaign finance system. There's something wrong with the government. I feel like any liberal you go up to, you can convince them that there's some type of, you know, problem. You know, something stinks, you know?
Right.
And I feel like that's generally agreeable to most people. But where people differ is like what the root of the problem is. So I think for me, especially, it was a very slow burn over time. But I, looking back, realized that there was always sort of like a Marxist undertone to the way I was processing problems. And I credit, you know, that to myself being a very, you know, process-oriented thinker. Like I I think of things in terms of like processes. And to me, when I started to read Marx and started to understand, leftist ideology in an academic sense, it just clicked for me when I read the Communist Manifesto, and then I read, excerpts of Capital, and I've read books here and there and different things. I just sort of understood it, and then it just clicked for me once I learned that all conflict in society, all history is a result of class conflict. Like, it just clicked for me. And it made sense that, one group is interested in capitalism functioning this way for their interest, not just because of it's their interest, but because capitalism fundamentally favors a propertied ruling class. So I think at that point, once I realized the terminology and understood definitions and looking at things in this way, it just clicked for me what was, I felt already there. Just, I didn't have a language, so to speak, for it.
Yeah. Well, for me, so I guess I was like heavily socially progressive, like liberal in pretty much my like freshman and sophomore year of college. But kind of towards the tail end of my sophomore year and going into my junior year, I should preface, my undergraduate degree was in environmental science. So I was like really passionate not only about the science, but also the policy behind, the environment and what was going on with our planet. And throughout, the sort of gen ed courses or the general courses that we're required to take in environmental science, environmental law, chemistry, all this other stuff, environmental chemistry, it was like almost like there was this reinforcement of like, well, basically the planet's fucking dying. Global warming's happening. All these devastating things are going to happen. And here's how we fix it. Compost, take shorter showers, buy a electric vehicle,
bicycle to work,
bike to work more, go meatless on Monday, whatever. And I agreed. I was like, oh yeah, I've got to lower my carbon footprint and I've got to do all these things. And it was just very stressful. And no one was around me doing any of these things. Like, the world kept on churning. And not to say that, your personal decisions, don't affect certain things, but realistically at a structural level, they fucking don't. So I just kind of had this thing going off in my head. Like, there's just something not right here. This is just very bizarre to me. And so I took this class at USF, and I had to read this book in it. And it was called What Every Environmentalist Needs to Know About Capitalism. And it just breaks it down about how there's really the capitalists, care about the planet or they don't care about the planet. There is no this, that, or the other. There's the profit motive. There's the drive to continue to compound and grow infinitely, ad infinitum.
Yeah.
And there is no stopping it. If the system stops, it dies. We know what happens when it stops. It comes to a grinding halt and everyone goes, out of work and all this other shit. And there's all these quotes in there, they of course quote the famous one, it's easier to envision the end of the world than it is to envision the end of capitalism. There's, all these breakdowns on how much, resources we're using on a daily basis and the amount of complete structural change it would require to get out of this, environmental calamity. And it's just, quite frankly, not going to fucking happen under capitalism. People will often say, well, capitalism moves too slowly or this, that, or the other, but it's just never going to happen. So not to derail totally on the environmental argument, we have a whole episode on that. But basically what I'm getting at is that was sort of the moment where I was like, yeah, this system's fucked. And we can't be looking at about individual changes. We have to be looking at systemic changes. And so obviously Marx was referenced throughout this book. I had already read Marx for other like kind of more political classes, but I don't think I had ever read Marx, the way you need to study it. And once I kind of got into that, got into more like leftist like political organizing groups who really, really helped me kind of digest all of this material and kind of help navigate you and certain ways so that you're not kind of just like lost in the realm of, radical ideas. And that's pretty much what did it. I haven't looked back since. And it's changed the entire way that I view the world. And it started primarily with the environmental question.
Yeah. I think like it's a mix. It was a slow burn, but there was also kind of like a defining point. And like any good high school intellectual, I graduated being a staunch libertarian.
Oh yeah, same.
Oh my
same.
gosh.
And I think like at some point after my freshman year of college started, I actually watched a documentary, and it really had broken down something similar to what Jared had said, but less on the environmental side and more kind of about the finances. And it kind of discussed how everything in our society is pretty much based off of loans, and these loans are pretty much written in a way that favors the upper class,
Right.
The banking industry. It's like in the text itself is that none of these loans, if you put them all together, if you look at the national deficit or whatever, it can never all be paid back. I'm sorry, the national debt. It can never actually all be paid back.
Right, yeah.
There's always going to be interest to be paid off on that. And when you look at this, they kind of give me this like uneasy feeling of like, there's no way this can last forever. Like this isn't actually how things are supposed to work. There's no like natural order to this. This is just going to be continuous growth forever. And that didn't sit right with me, but at the time I didn't really think of it as like, oh, this is like some Marxist shit,
Yeah.
But I was actually majoring in sociology almost by complete accident because it just
Right.
sounded like psychology. So I was like, all right, I'm just taking a few classes in there. And I did it, and you had to read Marx, but you also had to read other people
Right.
who spoke about capitalism in a very like third person kind of way. Like they spoke about capitalism from outside of capitalism.
Yeah, like
and
the-
it was
about
like
the entity
you start
itself.
realizing like, wow, there's all these different structural things, and like the way the world exists now is very specific to one form of economic system, And once you start realizing all that, I think it's just like a rabbit hole, Eventually you're gonna fucking
Right.
end up a fucking commie.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way out once you start realizing that it's been built that way.
And,
But,
and it's so
yeah.
deep. It's so deep. Like once it just, I mean, not just feeling like, whoa, it's deep, man.
It's deep, bro.
But I mean, it really does just like when you have really, really read this shit and you really, truly get a grasp on what's going on and how capitalism functions, even the littlest, most mundane things, you'll be like, fuck.
It's a curse.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna be like, no, that's capitalism. There it is.
Yeah.
Like, everything that happens.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like being a Marxist is kind of like, when you look up on WebMD your symptoms and then you basically think that you're going to die.
Right.
That's kind of Marxism, except every symptom is just capitalism.
No, I mean, it's true. It's like you see like microtransactions in video games, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, they need to make more and more money off of every single video game.
Right.
You know what I mean? Every little thing that happens, you're like, that's just capitalism. Like,
Right.
That's just how it works.
Yeah.
Get over it.
Yeah, but it's like we consent to it being the way that it works.
Yes.
Like it doesn't have to be that way.
Because it's easier to
Yeah.
consent to it. But anyway, so another listener question. I'll try and read this as coherently as possible. Nothing on the person asking the question. I'm just an illiterate. So this is from Jessica. And
Okay.
she is asking any ideas/suggestions for building a movement despite the often fractured and sometimes at odds leftist groups and tendencies. How should leftist groups cooperate/interact with each other in the coming years?
I'd say Trotskyists get the wall, anarchists get the wall.
No,
Oh my gosh.
I mean, so stuff like that, I think that's always fun to have like jokes. Like I am a strong proponent of various tendencies riffing on each other and good fun. With that said, I think that my biggest recommendation for getting sectarianism out of the left is get off the fucking internet.
Yeah,
honestly,
talk to each other.
Meet up with people who share, similar views as you, and go meet up with them. If they have a reading group, just talk to them. And one thing I would also say that I think a lot of people, especially who are so used to heavily being on the internet, once you become on the left, like you have to understand there's a lot of theory involved in this, and it does take a lot of time to kind of digest all of it. Don't take criticism or argument or disagreement as an attack on your personal character. Be willing to listen to other people's ideas when they disagree with you from a left perspective, and also be able to stand firm in your views or be able to correct yourself when you feel necessary. I think there's a lot of times new leftists, and it's really easy to tell when people are new on the left, quite honestly, because they tend to get super defensive very easily. They hold rigidly onto ideas that
Dogmas.
they're dogmas. And that's another thing with your tendency. Like, you shouldn't be dogmatic about it. I was literally the first group I was doing real left organizing with in college, there were a lot of people, I'll just say, that they could not even really be friends with or associate with people who had other tendencies than them. That's how severe it was. And I think that right there is so fucking cursed, and anyone who's like that should really have no business in left circles. I just think my biggest recommendations would be that the left needs to get the fuck off the internet, because the more the left meets in person, the better we always get along. Always. I've been at rallies with anarchists, Marxist-Leninists, Maoists, social democrats, progressive liberal democrats, and everyone's getting along and having a good time because they're all there for the cause, and that's what's most important.
And no one mentioned Stalin.
Right, exactly. and it's just it's that, and then also just you got to be able to take some fucking criticism. Criticism is not bad. Criticism and debate is a part of this thing. You do not grow by thinking that your fucking ideas have never been thought of before.
Or acting like you know everything.
Right, exactly. Yeah. You have to be able to say, shit, I wasn't aware of that.
And also, I would say, just kind of taking the mic for a second from Jared, just be open to different, ideas, but don't be dogmatic, because really, if you understand Marxism, it's just a tool for us to understand the sociological phenomena that underpins capitalism. And it's not really dogmatic in the sense that, we understand things through theories, like theories about labor and value and things like that. These things are subject to change in different conditions, and there's no reason to be dogmatic or sectarian about it. People have their fans, whether they're an ML, they're a Maoist, they're a Trotskyist or whatever,
Sodist.
Right. Or people have their different, sects or ideologies that they ascribe to. But at the end of the day, if you can't realize that your opinions and your ideas are fallible, and that you need to take in new information and constantly grow, I just feel first of all, you're probably really immature. And then second of all, you need to check yourself and grow before you interact. And then second of all, not belaboring this too much, but if you're concerned about left unity, you have to be dedicated to restorative justice. You just have to.
Right.
You can't look at the world in terms of dismissing people. You can't be that person that, puts their PayPal in their bio and they're don't talk to me unless you PayPal me $5. Or, I charge for emotional labor, nonsense like that. That's the stuff that I get it, but it's, it's divisive. You can't hope to have unity if you're not willing to put in the work to be in unison. Think of it in terms of a relationship. If you're in a relationship, you're always giving, the other person's always taking. How is that going to work out? It has to be a balance. You have to be dedicated to restorative justice. You have to be dedicated to non-dogmatism, critical thinking skills, and being open with other people, and not taking things personally, not taking it, as Jared said, like a personal attack to be wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
Yeah. It's the only way you learn anything. Fuck.
Jared had said, go out and talk to leftists. I'm going to give the recommendation, go out and talk to normal people.
Yeah.
Because you're going to realize that your leftist friends and you probably agree on a shit ton of more stuff than you realize once you actually talk to the normal public.
Right.
And I mean the normal public. I mean go to events and see what people think needs to be done in this country. Go to political events, liberal ones, go to shit or whatever.
Go to a Kid Rock concert,
and you'll hear, these people, like we've talked about before, they just don't see the structural realities. And so one thing the left can connect on is just seeing those structural realities. Every single one of us mentioned that in our answer and how we became leftist.
Right.
And so we should use that, And I'm not opposed to using synthetic views. I think that I don't really identify as an anarchist, but I really like their discussions on hierarchy. You know, that's something that seems to be missing on the Marxist-Leninist side sometimes. And I'm sure they have opinions on it, but there's not so much of a talk and a focus on hierarchy like there is in anarchist communities. And another one, they have so much there on talks about co-ops and things. Mm-hmm. And so it's really interesting to see the different kind of subjects that these different like sectarian groups really do focus on. You know,
I would just say, you know, as a final point, you know, we need each other. Like, we need each other. So fucking act like we need each other, and act as if we need each other. Act as if you need other leftists.
Yeah. There is no guarantee there's going to be revolution. We might not make it. The fucking world might end.
Right.
You know? And so it's like, to maximize our chances that this is going to happen, we need each other.
Yeah.
You're right. Absolutely.
There's
100%.
no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So I guess our third and final question for the evening. This is from Luiza. And she would like to know, or would like to hear rather, our views on the appropriation of identity movements by capitalism, which I think we have discussed.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's like I went for work training, right? And this was in Fort Lauderdale, and I walk into an Embassy Suites, and there is at the Embassy Suites, a Stonewall selfie station with a bunch of rainbow flags.
Oh, like the Stonewall riot?
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
Gotcha.
It was a Stonewall selfie station.
God.
And I'm just using like pinkwashing as an example, but obviously, like, Embassy Suites, I think they're owned by Hilton. Like, this is an industry that does not fucking give two fucks about gay people or gay liberation or any of the struggles of the people that were involved in the Stonewall riots. They certainly, the Hilton family would have definitely turned away fucking gay patrons, like, if they knew about them during that time frame. This appropriation of identity has one goal and one goal only. You know, it's to accumulate capital. It's to transition into a new face, a new economy, to gather new support and appear to be inclusive. But as we've said countless times on this show, you know, capitalism's amoral. It doesn't give a shit about what we view as being moral or amoral. It gives a shit about profit motive. And right now, in our society, you know, like, it's commonplace to be accepting of gay people. It's commonplace to be accepting of pride, you know, at least.
And it should be.
Right. It should be. But they're, of course, utilizing these things as a means to say, hey, look at what we're doing. So people are like, oh, I'm gonna go get my room at Embassy as opposed to fucking whatever another hotel because they support gay people. And that's just one instance.
I would say there's a fantastic video online by H Bomber Guy on YouTube called Woke Brands, and it's about 30 minutes, but I highly suggest you take a moment to watch it. And it breaks down kind of that dynamic Jared's talking about of there being structural reasons for them to be woke.
Right.
You know, it's not, again, capitalism is amoral. They're only doing it because it does generate profit. It generates revenue to be gay friendly or to be like suddenly woke, you know? And then on the other end, I would say as individuals, we really, really need to focus on doing our part in terms of research. Like, you can't just follow what the advertisements show you just because Nike is, you know, sponsoring Colin Kaepernick or whatever the commercial is this week. We really need to actually look and see, where are these CEOs donating? You know what I mean? Where are these companies? Where are these companies? Do they have anything unethical? I mean, I can fucking probably find like a million things unethical about Nike. So you just need to really focus on not being, you know, convinced by the advertisements.
You have to look at the bigger picture.
And we all do it. We just get lazy and we say, well, they're gay friendly because they have the you know, they have the rainbow flag. So of course they are.
Their check mark is rainbow flag for Pride Month.
But yeah, you got to do your diligence, look into it and see, is that true? You know, and a lot of the times it's not.
I mean, I just think like it's hard to think any institution of capital has like ethics as their primary motivating factor. Like I mean, to the person asking this question, Luiza, I mean, I think if you're a listener of this show, it should be clear at this point that capitalism has no ethics. Like, there's no ethical evaluation in capitalism except when it comes to whether we can acquire more market share of power, whether we can acquire more market share to sell more products to more people. What is culture dictating acceptable that we can market on? Like, I would think about pinkwashing, especially in that sort of sense or under that sort of lens. Like, capitalism only cares to the point that it can break into new markets and market to people or advertise to people and sell products and accumulate capital. Like, another example I would bring up is another discussion I got involved with online not too long ago would be like, when KFC decided to offer like vegan products.
Right.
Like a friend of mine asked me to weigh in for a friend of theirs, like, and give my opinion. And I just explained, like, first and foremost, you have to understand that KFC is a corporation. It's an institution of capital. First and foremost, their responsibility is not to the environment, not to ethical principles, not to other human beings, but to their shareholders.
Right.
And then their shareholders are responsible to each other, but also to, you know, the corporate structure, to long-term profit goals. And below that, you know, you have the distribution, you have this vegan product, but in no way, shape, or form is that going to, you know, influence the company itself to stop producing animal products. The only thing is it's going to do is appeal to vegans who want a quick bite.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's not necessarily, you know, an ethical stance, but it's not going to cut down on animal usage or animal products or animal, you know, slaughter or whatever.
Right.
It's just going to appeal to a secondary market demographic so that KFC can overall have more marketability to more demographics.
Well, and now you can bring your vegan friends to the fourth meal.
No, but that's a great point, because that's what's so funny is I literally saw someone like going off on this post online about how Burger King having the
Impossible
Burger. They're like, that thing tastes just like a regular Whopper. No one has any excuse at this point to like eat meat. All these companies have so many options. I'm like, first of all, like, I mean, I hate to sound mean because I understand they didn't like truly understand, but in my mind, I was just like, damn, you got to be really ate up with the dumbass to not realize what the fuck you just posted, because
cringe, bro.
You're literally you're going to this restaurant or this fast food chain, you're buying the Impossible Whopper, so they've now just gained a new demographic, and that money that you just spent on that Impossible Whopper has now just subsidized the continuation of the killing of fucking cows.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they're still selling meat products. Like, they don't, it's not like they accumulate all this money on this product and they're like, all right, let's make sure only this money is spent on more green products.
Yeah, think of it this way. Like, what if Burger King actually did that? Like, they sold so much vegan product that they actually decided to become a vegan restaurant.
Right, but if they
they're still not principled. They're still not acting within an ethical compass. They're acting supremely for chasing capital.
Well, yeah, because if they actually gave a shit, they'd say, you know what, we really want to make a concerted effort to change, you know, our relationship with the environment, and we also think, you know, killing animals is unethical. Our entire, us Burger King, our entire menu is now going to be all vegan, and we don't give a fuck what happens. Okay, obviously never going to happen, but even if it did, it would be driven by market forces. But
so there's no ethics involved in it at all.
There's no ethics. Ultimately, capitalism is like it's like a black box, like some shit from the Matrix, and it's just studying the shit out of you, and it's spitting out whatever simulation you want to see to keep you coming back for more.
Like that one Black Mirror episode. No,
but it has no, you know, doing this because it's ethical or not. If tomorrow 70% of the American population was like, hey, we're not cool with gays anymore, the embassy would be fucking ditching that Stonewall, whatever. They wouldn't hold ground and hold their principles. They're fucking, they don't fucking care about any of that shit.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of, like, even now, like, the modern right wing is like actually scared, like, which again terrifies me, as I've stated on previous episodes, is getting like in tune with this idea that, hey, like, maybe capitalism that we thought was like so good for us for so long is actually not so good, because it's giving people too much choice. It's allowing even like these progressive ideas to become popularized and then become marketable and in turn dominate
the culture. Everything. Yeah, exactly.
Like a right winger like Tucker can now say, no, NBC Sweets is just doing that for your money. You know what I mean? And he can sound smart to everybody, and the right wingers go, yeah, dumb leftists buying NBC Sweets because of that.
I mean, he would be right if he was saying that they were doing it for your money, because they are.
But that's
the problem, is when Tucker's right, he builds an audience.
But this is where this kind of shit gives rise to fascism, because the alternative is then you institute a far more authoritarian version of a market that has some kind of intervention of the state here and there, like to manage it, like some kind of to some degree state planning. I mean, fascism did have state planning, integrated with the sort of like elite bourgeois elements that run the capitalist show and bring them into this more authoritarian nationalist structure that's very hard-lined on strict cultural classical norms that do not allow for the entrance or the intrusion of any sort of progressive type of social mobility or social inclusion within their model.
And there we go. Everything relates back to Nazis somehow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But anyway, that's all of our questions.
Yeah, all of our questions. Very awesome questions.
Yes.
So we very, very much appreciate
that was fun. Thank you.
And we do want to
listeners.
we do want to incorporate more listener questions in our episodes. So please comment on our stuff. If you have a question, let us know what your question is. Message us directly. We would gladly take your question on air.
Yeah, we'll do this again for sure. But just, we want to thank the people that are intently listening. To Anthony, Jessica, Luiza, and other people that may not have sent us their questions. We do really value you guys. And if you value the work that we put out, you can find us on all major platforms. Again, if you listen to us on Apple, it really helps if you leave us a review because that helps other people find the podcast. We do have a Patreon. We also have PayPal. If you're interested at all in supporting us monetarily so that we can continue to produce this high-value content for you, we ask that you check out those links in the description. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on all the major platforms. So anytime you want to interact with us, send us a message on the page, shoot us your questions. We really appreciate our community and want to interact with you guys more. And we hope you stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for joining us.